Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Hayes, Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at the Philadelphia Fed. This is my first ROC conference since joining the Fed, and I must say that I am blown away by the level of engagement of both the presenters and the audience members. We are fortunate to have 3 Federal Reserve presidents taking part in this closing session: Loretta Mester of Cleveland, Dennis Lockhart of Atlanta, and Pat Harker of Philadelphia. They will offer a critical conversation about the Fed's role in our communities. And who better to moderate this dialogue than an award-winning journalist? You all know Michelle Martin from National Public Radio. Where she has brought us stories from the White House to the corner barbershop for the past decade. She has more awards than I can list or even count, but I must mention that Emmy. You might also have seen her from ABC News, PBS, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. I know her from all of those, but I also know her as a friend and a mentor. Michelle is an exceptional journalist and a documentary filmmaker, in part because she brings the stories to you. You're into those stories as well. From September 11th to the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, she makes us feel as though we were right there. Whether it's a congressional budget battle, race relations, poverty in America, she always manages to make you think that you are right there on the spot and you see things with new eyes. That's outstanding journalism. And it's also the power of great storytelling. The Fed has important stories to tell. Though I doubt many of you think of us as must-see TV, we at the Philadelphia Fed, and I think across the system, we're hoping to change that. We want to be more creative about how we tell our stories and inform the public. This is a pivotal moment for us. And I'm so excited to be at an event like this, to find the deeper, richer stories in the work that we do. Hearing from partners like all of you helps us to tell our story. We may never be Michelle Martin, but we can highlight the good we do and the people we serve. So with that, I will hand it over to Michelle and thank all of you for coming. I know that you're going to enjoy the conversation between these amazing Fed presidents and this world-class journalist. So we'd like to welcome the presenters, the panelists to the stage. And Michelle Martin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Steps?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you all so much for coming. I am very honored and humbled to be here. I don't know if we even have a resident genius, so which is very exciting. That I think the latest one of the latest MacArthur Award winners was a member of this conference. It's very exciting, and it was also exciting for me because I was reminding Deborah that actually my first national beat at the Wall Street Journal was covering housing and community development. So this is actually where I kind of learned how to cover national issues. And one of the reasons that I always love that beat is that if you think about it, everybody has a relationship to housing and community development, from people who have no place to live, to people who live in, a high-tech, 30-room, mansion. Not that I've ever been in one, but And everybody lives in a community of one sort or another. So believe me when I say that if no one else has said thank you to you today, let me be one to say thank you all for the work that you do. And thank you all for the work that you do. I know that we often honor certain people in public service who are highly visible to us, and we thank them for their service. So Dennis, you in particular, as you finish your tenure, but all of you, if I may, say, if no one else says to you today, thank you for your service. So before we get, so should I refi my mortgage? Just kidding. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Okay.
Just saying.
I always wondered about that, like, because do people like come up to you at parties and ask you things like that, like they do doctors? You know how doctors people come up to you at parties and ask you like about your neck hurts or whatever. Do people come up to you at parties and ask you stuff like that?
Yes.
What do you say?
I tell them read my speeches, you know.
Really? I'm sure that makes you popular on the cocktail party circuit.
Yeah, then I go grab a beer and it's good.
Yeah. Loretta, do people come up to you and ask you for?
Yeah, they ask for stock picks.
No.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
You know, index funds.
What do you say? You say, I don't want to go to jail, so could you kindly not ask me that?
I said, I'm not an investment advisor.
Yes, exactly.
Dennis, what do you say when people come up to you
usually
at parties?
it's a bond trader who comes up and says, would you just wink if you're going to raise interest rates? And
And what do? Go, oh my God!
I go stone-faced, absolutely
Really?
stone-faced.
Do you, that must be awkward. Has it changed who you are in the world doing in this kind of work?
Oh, not really changed who I am, but I think we all have to be a bit measured and a bit circumspect about what we say, when we say it, and how we interact with groups. And so I'm sure we all have our techniques, but I can just say, you know, if I told you the answer to your question, I'd have to shoot you.
I am curious about on these issues, because each of you has a data-driven background. You know, Pat, you're an engineer. Loretta, you and Dennis are, Madam President, Mr. President. Sorry, I was being very familiar. Apologize.
No,
Presidents.
please.
Does the world, what's different on the inside than it was when you were on the outside? Like you are literally quoting from Hamilton, you're in the room where it happens now, right? So is there something that looks really different on the inside than it looked from when you were on the outside? Do you want to start, Dennis?
Well, the subject matter that we deal with is obviously very serious, of national and literally global importance. What has struck me over the years is what a close-knit collegial group of policymakers it is. And in our meetings, it's not 100% serious. There's moment jokes. Now, sometimes they're insider economist jokes. But Loretta, you know,
But I got laughs. I do get laughs.
but I know when to laugh at any rate. But
That means you're a woman now.
in public service, in my opinion, Michelle, the Fed operates in work. We enter the room, we're focused on the greater good of the economy. It's collegial, and we make decisions.
Loretta, is there anything different now that you're on the inside?
Well, I'm a little bit different than Dennis is that my career's been in the Federal Reserve. And before I became president of the Fed, thank you for inviting me back. And so I had been attending FOMC meetings for longer than I care to remember, almost like 13 years before becoming, president. And so literally the president of the Philadelphia Fed to about a seat there at the table. So, in terms of a distance, it was a very, very short distance, but you do feel the responsibility more when you're sitting in that chair. And I have to agree with Dennis. The thing that strikes me about what's great about that committee is it really is an apolitical, policy nerdy, which I'm a big fan of being a nerd and a policy wonk. I think we should celebrate that because that is the way good policy is done. And we get together and we may have different perspectives. It's a science, but it also is a judgment. And we talk and we all can express our views. And the committee, as I've seen it, and I've seen it under different chairs, it really is a collegial atmosphere that we can actually feel comfortable in expressing alternative views. And then the mechanism is such that you get to the committee gets to a policy answer. So in terms of how it actually works, the structure I think is very good. And as you know, it's a structure that's a regional structure. You know, the Federal Reserve banks are across the country. We bring our regional perspectives to Washington. So you get everyone represented in that room, whether you're, you know, in a small town, a rural area, a big city, it's all represented in that room.
I'm going to ask you something about that in a minute, but Pat Harker, what about you? You had a very different path to this post. I mean, you were a university president, you were a White House fellow, I think you were a Marine. Do I have that right? No, that was Dennis.
What was that?
Somebody was in the military before. Was in the Marine Reserves? You were in the Marine Reserves. Sorry, confused me. But you had a different path. So is there something that looks different now that you're on the inside than it looked when you were on the outside?
Yeah, two things. One, I would echo what my colleagues have said. There's a lot of headlines often in the press, you know, big disagreement. It sounds like there's almost a food fight at the FOMC, right? You read but it's not that way. I mean, people take their job dead seriously. We disagree, but we disagree with facts and history behind us, right? It's not just to disagree to be disagreeable, but because people have different views and perspectives on the same data that we're all looking at. And that's a healthy process for the country. The other thing, though, that is equally impressive is how this system that was set up in 1914 with the reserve banks works. I mean, it's not just that the presidents get along with the governors, but it's all these people in the room. It's Deborah and her team, Teresa and her team. It's all the folks who run the system day to day, who do it in a collaborative way. That's been really impressive to me in the little over a year I've been here, is how collegial and collaborative, not just the presidents are, but it's all up and down the system.
Well, speaking of acting in the public interest, I do feel that as public servants, it's appropriate that we take questions from the public. To that end, you will find on your tables, I believe that there are pads and hopefully writing implements, if you remember what those are. This is one, if you haven't seen one in a while. You can send questions up. Those are press club rules. That's the way we do it at the press club, just to make it not a fitness contest. Running to the mic. So you write a question. If you have a question, a comment, sort of a thought, I will be getting them throughout our conversation. Also, there's a hashtag. You can tweet us at the hashtag is Reinvent2016. Use it. I can see what you're saying. Somebody had something nice to say about NPR. I appreciate that. But question, comment, send it up. We'd love to incorporate your ideas in this conversation. So, you know, to the end, Deborah, we were talking about stories. One of the things that I always found in journalism is how many stories are hiding in plain sight. Mm-hmm. You know, in hindsight, you think, you know, why didn't anybody talk about that? Or we always knew that. How you're just now writing about this, or you know, everybody knows this. It's only now coming to public attention. So I'd like to ask each of you in your region, what's a story that's hiding in plain sight that we should know about? Who wants to start?
Well, I'll start. So you think about this conference. The headlines are always around the FOMC, and people don't understand what we do in our communities. So a few months ago, I was with Mayor Red over in Camden, New Jersey, and meeting with all the community leaders there. And what I heard was how involved we are through our research and convening people in helping push that city forward. That's a story that doesn't get told very often, because the headline is what we do with the Fed funds rate, with the interest rate. But there's story after story.
Give an example.
So the kind of research we do to understand things like gentrification that comes up in this conference, right? What happens to the gentrified? Where do they go? What are the policies that we need to put in place so that we take a regional perspective? So one community can say, yay, we win, we're gentrified. But the problem hasn't been solved, it's just moved somewhere else. You know, that kind of work affects policy. We are not policymakers in that realm, but we can affect policy through the research we do and the outreach and the convening that we do.
Loretta, what's a story that's hiding in plain sight in your region?
I recently went to Eastern Kentucky, to Hazard, Kentucky, and it was a great trip. I got to talk to a lot of the people in the foundations down there, and we had a stop at the community college. And there's a program down there that's actually training coal miners to do the electrical and fiber optic lineman work that we talked about this morning. And it was striking because I got to talk to the people in the class. They were actually graduating on the Friday after I was there on the Wednesday. So 30 people started the class, 28 were graduating, and they all had jobs lined up or multiple offers already lined up. So that is an example of the kind of programs that can actually address some of the issues in these regional transitional economies. And I guess I will put out to the people in this room, one of the things that we now have to think about is how do you scale that? How do you get these little pockets of things that are actually really working? And I can point to other examples. There are programs that are really working to help transitions where we have an economic transition underway, an important one. How do we scale that up? And I think if I'm thinking about sort of the research agenda going forward, it's that scalability that I think is the next big thing that we have to think about. The other thing that I found, just again going around the district, the Allegheny Conference, which is a set of business people that really care about the region, undertook a very big study about what are the occupations that are going to be in demand from business going forward over the next decade. They found out that really what's happening is that employers and the universities and the apprenticeship programs aren't really talking to one another about what are those occupations, what are the skill sets in demand now, what are the skill sets that are going to be in demand. And having people come together and do this kind of work and connect is something that I think the Federal Reserve is very good at, and I think we have a role to play in doing that. We just now have to push it forward. So I think getting the business, one of the things here that struck me I was in a session that we talked about small business, development, but also funding. How do you get the businesses that are going to be hiring the people, right, together in the same room? And I would put out for the Philadelphia Fed and for our policy people, community development staff in Cleveland, getting businesses also to be involved in this discussion, in this conference. I think that would be a great thing to push, again, the ball forward. So we've made a lot of progress. I think the Fed doesn't always get the credit it probably deserves because maybe we're a little reticent to toot our own horn on this, but we do have this role of trying to bring the right people together. And I think this public-private partnership is an area that because we have ties to the business community, we have ties to the community development organizations, we have ties to foundations, we can push the ball forward.
So one of your tools is convening. You can get people together in a room who might otherwise not be in the room together. So Dennis, what about you? What's a story from your region that's hiding in plain sight?
Well, I'll try to make my answer relevant to this conference, which is, of course, about reinventing cities. I think there are many stories, both positive and negative, of cities that have struggled to reinvent themselves. And one way to think about the economy, which is not the way we typically measure it in our monetary policy deliberations, is the economy is a mosaic of city and regional economies. And the experiences of those microeconomies can be extraordinarily different. In my district in southeast of the United States, what's going on in South Florida is entirely different than what's going on in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for example, or what is going on in Nashville, Tennessee. These are economies that have their own personalities and their own set of strengths and weaknesses. So if you think of the national economy as more of a mosaic, it becomes a very human story at the end of the day of whether communities are able to muster the leadership to move their community in a positive direction, in some cases reinventing what that community is all about. And I think there's an element of serendipity in whether a community actually has the talent at a critical juncture to do the things necessary to see that a community succeeds. And not every community has the talent.
Have you seen any commonalities in communities that do that and those that don't? I mean, I recognize what you just said. It's like
session there was
serendipity,
that I attended this morning, some attention was given to Chattanooga, which I think is a very impressive story, because the story is, I think it was 1969, the EPA deemed Chattanooga the most polluted city in America. And apparently that galvanized some civic leadership saying things have got to change, and they went through a process that was both physical in changing the riverfront and elements of their downtown area, but also they were able to recruit a couple of kind of anchor industries, most recently Volkswagen, so a big auto plant with training associated with it. And Chattanooga is a thriving place. They also, I found this fascinating, and I went there a couple years ago to meet some venture capitalists and entrepreneurs. They got high-speed broadband installed in the city ahead of most cities. So they had a little cell of very high-speed broadband. And that attracted some kind of experimental entrepreneurs who wanted to see what they could do with it. And they got themselves into the digital economy from having been an industrial city more rapidly than cities that just weren't paying attention to broadband capabilities. So it's just a terrific story, but it wouldn't have happened probably without a half a dozen leaders who had day jobs who kind of took on the reinvention of Chattanooga. And that turns this, what we're talking about in this meeting, this conference, into a very human story at the end of the day, whether a city has those figures or does not have those cities.
So is that one of the revelations of your time in this post, is that it isn't just about the information, it's about the human will to make things happen? Is that one of the big takeaways?
Yeah, we all travel our districts probably very frequently, and I have a large district, so I get to talk to people in a lot of different sub-economies and a lot of different cities. And yes, one of the lessons is, how varied the experiencing of the national economy is from place to place.
You know, in fact, we have a question along those lines. Somebody was, do you mind if I identify your question? Jessica Ice is asking if you're concerned about productivity growth in your district as the Rust Belt shifts more toward employment in eds and meds. That's a good question. Who wants to speak to that?
Well, productivity growth is one of the major issues in the national economy. And at the same time, it's a bit of a head scratcher. That is to say, we don't fully understand why we're in this period, which has been going on for several years, of very subdued productivity growth. And I'm sure the research staff of Philadelphia and Cleveland, along with mine, have been looking carefully at it. In the case of my bank, we have focused on the notion of capital deepening. Capital deepening is, in simple words, is the amount of equipment and software that you provide workers to be productive. And that is connected to capital expenditures and investment of businesses, particularly, but also of governments in support of their workers. That has been extremely weak for some quarters, at least, in the U.S. economy. So we're trying to understand this productivity question, while at the same time, I'm sure Loretta and Pat have had the experience. If you talk to business leaders, they say, oh, yeah, we're investing for productivity all the time. That's, in fact, mostly what we're investing for is to make our workforce more productive. So it's a bit of a puzzle.
And we have a lot of really good questions coming up here. I love it when you can get people to do your job for you. Speaking of productivity, thank you. You know, any of you read the Washington Post regularly? You know, they've got this feature in the magazine called Date Lab, where they try to match people up. And I love that they don't do this anymore. They used to do this needless to say, I read this more closely than I have any reason to. I don't know why. But they have this thing, they say, okay, when they're trying to match people up, they say brag a little. And so now that we've bragged a little, I'm going to ask you to confess, which is, what's keeping you up at night?
Oh boy, a lot of things, but I'll start with the fact that I know you have twins. I have twins, boy-girl twins, and my daughter is now pregnant with twins. So first I promised her I'd make a crib when we thought it was one kid. Now I need to make 2 cribs, right? So, but moreover, it does make you think, as you step back and start to think about that next generation coming. What's our country, our region, our city, our state, what's it going to be like for them? Yeah, it's made me reflective of the fact that, and this word's come up a lot in this conference, the lack of hope. So beyond productivity measures and all the wonky things, and I put myself in the camp of being a wonk and a nerd, hope drives all of what we're talking about here, right? And when a community, when an individual loses hope, that's when we're in trouble. And I worry about that. I lose sleep over that because there's a lot of things we can do in terms of economic policymakers. But ultimately, it's everybody in this room and the people who are doing this kind of work all around the country that provide that hope to communities.
Can I hear from people? Has that been a big theme? People have talked about people losing hope. May I know, do you feel that people have lost hope in the future? People feel that? You're hearing a lot of that? May I ask, does anyone not feel that way? Do you don't feel that way? I just wanted to get a sense of, so thank you for that. Loretta, what's keeping you up at night?
So I'm not a good sleeper, so I'll confess that. So there's so many things on the list. I would say 2 big things, and maybe it's a different take on what Pat said. I think we have lost trust in institutions. And I'm not going to say, that could be very credible. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that we might have lost trust in our institutions, but I think we need to have institutions to be able to affect change. And the fact that we now distrust some of the institutions that I think would be in a position to affect very good change, I think is going to make it even harder to get there.
Well, Loretta, I'm glad you brought that up because the fact is I was going to bring that up. The fact is we have just only recently, it has come to light that people have very good reasons to have a lack of trust, particularly in certain financial institutions. And it's not a secret that that's been a theme of this campaign, right? And given that your institutions rely so heavily on information and data, there are a lot of people who don't even believe facts as are presented to them.
That was my second worry. My second worry is we've become, and anyone at this conference working in the field knows that these are not simple things to solve. These problems are not simple. These are hard problems, they're complex problems. The policies are complex. A lot of policies that seem like they'd be obvious policies have unintended consequences. To be able to do that kind of analysis is very difficult. I mean, the Federal Reserve, we have community development functions that spend their time looking at it. And yet we're basically in a soundbitey kind of quick fix, facts aren't facts, we don't care about facts anymore. I mean, for me, that's really problematic because my whole life has been about trying to analyze the data, look at what it's telling me, basing policy on that. So you have this distrust of institutions that can do good, and then you have this sort of no respect anymore for facts, and probably they're connected, right? And how do you get people back to saying, no, we need sound analysis. Things are nuanced, even though we have sound bites. These are nuanced, policies. They're nuanced arguments that have to be made. Getting back to that, and I have hope. I come to conferences like this. I have a lot of hope because I see all you and hear about the good work that you're doing. And this conference was great because it was a lot about success, right? And we've had a lot of success in a lot of your regions and your cities and your rural areas. There's been a lot of success. Again, how do you get the successes combined? And there's strength in sort of combining things. I think the Federal Reserve can play a role in that and sort of finding the commonality. Right? I think we're very good at analyzing what are the things that come out of the little pockets of greatness that are going on and finding the common elements. So Dennis was saying leadership and collaboration. There was a study at the Boston Fed that actually identified that in looking across lots of programs that are working. One of the big things was you need to have leadership and you need collaboration, and you need employers to get together and understand, and the civic leaders and the community development folks know that it's in everyone's best interest to work together. And we're a competitive country. Competition has made us great, but in certain circumstances, working together can make us greater. And so I think the study basically documented what you were saying, that it takes really sound leadership and collaboration to move ahead. But I come here and I see everyone here. I become hopeful that we can do it.
It makes me wonder whether those are related to the other issue you raised, which is you wonder if the relationships and the real world relationships that people have with each other is an antidote to the lack of trust in institutions, because you can look someone in the eye and that is your truth, as opposed to somebody making something up. Not that I'm talking about anyone in particular, but we have a number of questions. I was looking for patterns. I am listening to you. I hope you do understand. I'm just looking to see if people have similar questions. And there are a number of questions about if you believe, well, here's just one. They're phrased differently, but it's the same question. In your view, what's the impact of economic inequality on economic growth? Another question similar is, what's your view about the connection between social mobility, inequality, and growth? And we also have a question tweeted to that effect. Who would like to answer that? Who would like to address that? Do you think there is? Dennis, both of you, Pat, Dennis, would you like to?
I'll give a couple thoughts on that question. One way to think of, first, we're an economy dominated by consumption. 65 to 70% of the U.S. economy is grounded in consumption. Human beings, individual human beings, can only individually consume so much. So the broader the prosperity, the stronger the economy, in my opinion. And the broader the sharing of income growth, the stronger the economy in a consumption-driven economy. So this inequality question that has come to the fore in the last few years, I think has implications for economic growth, for the strength, the global strength and the global role of our country, and it's one of the foremost issues. I thought you were going to ask me what keeps me up at night. Mm-hmm. It's the concern that there is a growing disconnect between our human capital and its capabilities and the demands of modern employment. You can't help but be impressed by reading about machine learning, robotization, various forms of automation, and how they're going to affect jobs in the future. And I'm not sure we're keeping our human capital development apace with the development of the economy as at least reflected in some of those phenomena like automation. So the jobs of the future are going to require sophisticated skills and constant adaptation, and I'm not sure we're keeping our human capital stock up to that task.
Pat Harker, did you also want? Thank you for that. I was gonna come back to you. I didn't forget you. I got you. Do you want to talk about this whole income inequality, the impact of income inequality on economic growth? We have a number of questions along those lines.
So I would echo what Dennis said. If you just do the math, right? If this large segment of our society does not have the disposable income in their hands, the economy won't flourish, given that 70-ish% of our economy is consumer spending. So that's the facts, right? So, and the wealthier you are, the less you spend, as Dennis said, because it's hard to spend a lot of money every day. So they save more. People in lower income brackets will spend more. And so that's important from an economic point of view. But it's also important, obviously, for a social point of view. We're spending a lot of money and time in our society on a variety, a myriad of social issues. Many of those were discussed in this conference as well. And that is also unproductive in the economic sense, right? It's productive because we're not really moving the needle very far unless we do the kind of things that people talked about here with affordable housing, the jobs that are created, and the skills for people to fill those jobs. If we don't do that, we as a society will spend more and more of our time just trying to solve the social problems that keep coming up, and they get deeper and deeper and deeper. It's time to really focus, and I think many in this conference talked about this, on a systemic approach to all those issues. It's not one thing, right? It's all those things together that will make a difference and move people toward prosperity. And without doing that, we as a nation will suffer. And this is particularly acute, I think, as we as a nation age. Right? If we look at the age demographics, there's a recent report that came out related to productivity on the fact that, and you hear this anecdotally from a lot of people, the people who know how to tinker with the machines, the people who know how to make the most out of something, they're aging out. And we need that next generation to come in and learn from them and, as well, go beyond that with the new technologies. We need to make that happen now. If we don't, the baby boomers are all starting to retire. And I worry about that too. If we don't do that now, the inequality issues will just get worse. And so again, housing, jobs, and education and workforce development are all critical.
A couple of questions about what your institution's role should be. What should the Fed's role be regarding community development at the national level? It speaks in part to what you've been talking about here, a sense of not a lot of coherence in addressing issues that everybody knows are issues. And this particular questioner says, or should this only be at the regional level? There are a number of questions along that line. One is, how does the community development function of the Federal Reserve Bank contribute to economic policy at the Fed? Who wishes to address that?
Well, we have a regional structure of the Federal Reserve, and each of the regional banks do have a community development function. And we've had this for many, many years. It started with the Community Reinvestment Act and our giving assistance to the financial institutions in our regions to be able to comply with that act. But as community development has become a more important part of regional revitalization and economic development, the community development functions at the Federal Reserve have broadened as well. And so we focus on the regional issues that are relevant in our regions, but of course there's a lot of commonality, as this conference has shown, across regions. So, we are all engaged. We convene various parties in our region. The community development folks here are working with each other. If you look at the back of your program, what you'll see is I think there's 6 Federal Reserve banks that were involved in putting on this conference, with Philadelphia in the lead. So we are working together on a program of activities that we can bring together common interests and common problems. At the national level, the Board of Governors also has a community development staff. Again, it's engaged together as a system to push the agenda forward.
But what about the second part of the question, which is, does community development influence economic policy?
Yeah, it does, in the sense that these are vital issues. All the things that we've been talking about, workforce development, productivity growth, transitioning from a less global to a more global economy, affect monetary policy, but they also affect the economic vitality of the regions we're in. And we are representative of our regions. So, we work on policy issues. We're not fiscal policymakers, so that isn't the tool. But we can influence the dialogue, and we can help evaluate. So I think one of the important roles of the Federal Reserve System is we are, I think at this point, I would say, a respected third, objective evaluator. So some of the work going on in Cleveland is to evaluate different policies. So early on in the financial crisis, it became clear that Cleveland had a large number of properties under foreclosure. The Cleveland Community Development staff took that on as a topic to investigate which policies are good at addressing that. How could you move properties quicker through the process? What roles do different kinds of policies have, land banks, for example. So again, I think we can serve a role of being an evaluator of policies, even if we're not the ones who implement those policies. And I view that as being an important role that the Federal Reserve can play in our regions.
Speaking of,
I
does
think
anyone else want to add to that?
I think we have to be clear, we're not a development agency. As a central bank, our primary or dominant responsibility is monetary policy. Having said that, we have some strengths that we can bring to bear on community development issues. Among those is research, and I think increasingly our community development function is research-oriented, trying to marshal evidence for support of particular initiatives or particular policies. And as a convener, this conference being an example, where we can bring together people who are far more expert than we are in the details of problems or issues in a particular community. Those are strengths that are appropriate for the central bank, I think, to wield and to use in support of helping the microeconomies of our economy get better.
Pat, did you want to speak
No.
on this? Okay. There's a question about that. It's interesting. Is growth in GDP the best measure of a society's well-being? Are there other effective measures? Who wishes to address that? That is interesting to me because, of course, we're all in the media fascinated with Bhutan, which none of us has ever been to.
I'll throw in a quick answer.
Yes.
It's, in my opinion, it's not growth of GDP, it's growth of per capita GDP.
Right.
That is to say, in a society that's improving economically is improving because each individual is more prosperous. If we grow our population at the same pace as we grow the GDP, then no one's making, generally speaking, people are not making progress. They're not improving their state in life. So it's per capita that matters.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I would agree with that, that while GDP is not the only measure of success of a society, it is necessary for a lot of other things to happen.
That's interesting. Gosh, guys, I can't do a chapter question. You can, I'm trying to let's see, to actively doing work. It says, Fed Chair Janet Yellen, Brown University grad, mentioned that the Federal Reserve System should have a role in addressing the racial wealth gap. And the questioner asks, how can your respective banks do so within your jurisdictions? And if you're actively doing work in this area, could you describe the extent of your efforts? It is an interesting question. It's a slightly different question than the whole economic mobility, but they are linked, are they not? Who wishes to address that?
So I can tell you one thing that we're doing in Cleveland is there was a study of income inequality. And of course, racial differences in income and unemployment are key. Here, I'm falling apart here, but that's okay.
Loretta.
I know, what can I say? And there's all these photographers. But anyway, bear with me. And what they've shown is that where you start, so if you take the distribution of income, right, your lowest income up 5 quartiles or quintiles, right, it's very difficult if parents were in the lowest quintile to be mobile in that income distribution. So where you are is very dependent on where your parents were. And if you're already in the 4th or 5th quintile, staying up there, 60% stay up there, right? So it's really about what we've learned from this. It's not just taking snapshots through time of the income distribution. It's really thinking about how do you move people from the lowest part of that income distribution up. And I think those are the kinds of things that we're doing within the Federal Reserve to investigate some of the issues that our minority communities face more than perhaps other kinds of communities.
Well, and also one of the interesting data points is that African Americans have, unlike other groups, have not been as successful in keeping their kids up, in passing on their even having attained middle class status, being able to maintain it for the next generation. For all kinds of reasons. I know I'm not talking about the NBA players. I'm talking about people teachers and firefighters and so forth like that. So do you think that we as a society, broadly defined, do we talk enough about moving people up? Do you think we still care about that?
oh, I think we're starting to care more and more now. Because I think the realization has come to a lot of people that unless we do that, we're not going to succeed as a country, right? I mean, unless we solve these problems, we just won't achieve what we believe we are as Americans. And so, you know, you look at these issues, particularly around African-American unemployment and so forth, and this is, again, where the Fed and other scholars can bring research to bear. So we know, right, through various studies, that there's housing discrimination, there's job discrimination when these studies happen. We know, as somebody said this morning, right, in one of their descriptions of what was going on in their community, one of the issues they had to address was structural racism in their community, to move the community forward. And I think there's a growing understanding through the research that's happening, plus the practice that's happening on the ground, that it's not just putting in this policy and that policy, this workforce development program. Those are all important, but we need to address some much more fundamental issues if everybody's going to succeed in this society.
Others, do you think that we care about moving people up the way we say that we do?
I have to say that I think one of the lessons of this electoral season is that there are a lot of people in America who believe the elites don't care that much and have not paid enough attention to an inclusive economy that works for, if not everyone, as many people as possible. And that the leadership cadre of society has not been adequately focused on the conditions of those people who, or the circumstances that cause people to be left behind.
You know, you have the data, though. I'm sure that many of the people who are in leadership positions would disagree, because I think that many of them would say, what are you talking about? I work on this 24/7. Why do you think there's such a disconnect between what these leaders feel that they're doing and the results as they are experienced by the people in whose behalf they are working? Why do you think that is? Thoughts?
One answer to that question is that I'll just make it very personal. I recognize that I live in a bubble, and I look through a small peephole at reality, and I don't experience or get close enough to the broad reality of much of America. So when I read articles about the number of people who could not pay an $800 medical bill if they had an emergency, or the number of people who live paycheck to paycheck and don't quite make it, so they get a payday loan at the end of a period, a work period, a month or 2 weeks or whatever. And the number of people who, if our payment system went down for a week, wouldn't be able to buy food. And the numbers are astonishing of that kind of experience in the country. And in daily professional life, daily personal life, I don't experience it. So it's hard to tune in and really understand the fabric of society. And so I think many people, particularly professionals in the development area, understand these things and work hard, but people who are doing important jobs across the country don't.
Loretta, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I said earlier that we're kind of in a soundbite kind of world. So we have a very short attention span, but then it takes us a long time to do anything. So we have this kind of dichotomy between sort of like it just takes a long time to get things done, and I think we've kind of don't understand the urgency sometimes of some of these things. And I guess as Dennis said, it's perhaps maybe our experience is different. But I do think that's changing. I think that what we've been living through for the past 3 years, for maybe the election cycle, whatever you want to put on it, in recent times has brought it to the fore. And these are very important I think how we get through this is very important for the next 10 to 20 years. I mean, I think this is a very crucial time. And again, there is no easy answer, but we have to do an evaluation. We have to look at the policies that are being, proposed. We carefully consider those, because I think how we get through this. I think one of the things that economists are good at are evaluating, but one of the things we haven't really done is we can say that trade, global trade is a good, right? We know we can look at an economy that isn't free trade and an economy with free trade. And in general, the economy that has a free trade economy will be better. But that doesn't mean that every person in that economy will be better. And how, as a society, we make sure that the transition brings up the bottom, the people who are losing their jobs. Coal mining, not from free trade, but it's a declining industry because of technological change and other parts of the economy changing. How do we make sure that they're not left behind and bring them with, right, the better economy for all? So again, economists, we're very good at sort of looking at different steady states, but the transitions we haven't really studied, except now we are. I mean, I think we're doing a much better job, and not just in the Fed. I think this is a profession. We're much more focused on those kinds of issues. So again, I'm hopeful, but I think we have to keep the lens on it and keep thinking about it, because ultimately, right, how the society evolves and how the country does is dependent on us addressing those problems.
We're down to our last couple of minutes, so I was hoping I could stick a couple more in before we let you go. And we're going to hear some closing remarks from you, Pat, so I want to make sure we save time for that. Before we let you go, you have a couple more? Let me see. I'll sneak mine in here. The debates are tomorrow night. You may have heard this. I don't know. I want to know, if you had a chance to craft questions, a question or two, what would it be? And I can do that because I have absolutely no role in it. And so, but if you could ask a question, what would it be?
Boy, there's a lot of questions, right, that I think we all as Americans want to ask. But I think what I've not heard in this cycle, which I think people are yearning for, is what is the vision of the country? Right? Not just at some 50,000-foot level, but what do we have as a vision together as a country? Right? Because we're going to sink or swim together. Right? This is fundamentally the issue. I mean, and how do we engage and energize local communities, leaders, as Dennis was talking about, not just in Washington, but create a framework and a policy framework that allows the kind of work that happens here. Because, as Loretta said, what we often look for are quick fixes. We create a program, we pass it, the money flows, we're done. That's not the way real progress happens. This room knows that better than anyone. It's hard work to get a community engaged, to get a community bought in, to listen to a community about what they want. It's also hard work to do that at the national level. Right? And I'd like to just hear what that vision is and how are they going to engage people and not think, that like many, because we want a quick fix, we'll just do this and the problem will be solved. That's just not true.
Anybody else have any other questions? I can tweak them for you.
I would like to ask what they think the role of the federal government is in raising up the standards across the country. I think that's going to be an important issue, and what that role is.
What's your question for him, Dennis?
Well, I think most people, listening to people who are supposed to know what they're talking about, usually have in their mind some very deep question like, should we be pessimistic or optimistic? Or, is there reason to be hopeful, or are we doomed in some way? And when we're caught in the moment, as we all are, the moment of dealing with national problems and dealing with a sluggish economy, it's very easy to kind of convince yourself that this is really an extraordinary period and things are getting worse. Well, in fact, I think there's much reason to be optimistic. The performance of our economy at the moment is not outstanding, but it is not bad at all, really. And we're continuing to make progress in employment, and we will, I think, find solutions to those things that get in the way of speeding up the growth of the economy. I think that at least the solutions are within our grasp as a society. These are not imposed on us by outside forces, at least not in the United States. So, you know, when all is said and done, and I think of the pros and cons of any set of indicators, I still come out net optimistic that the country can continue to improve.
You've led very elegantly to what was my last question, and if you'd like to amplify, you may. It's a question that one of our guests asked, which is, what's giving you hope right now? What's giving you hope? So we'll end on that.
You know, I think what has to give you hope is the on balance, still positive, optimistic mindset of people in the country, and the relative lack of cynicism, the relative lack of defeatism or fatalism. And when I get inspired when I meet with younger groups who very much are looking to try to improve the country, improve the world, and you know, you can't help from when you come away from those encounters, you can't help but say, well, things are going to be all right. You know, these people are coming along and they're taking leadership roles, and it will be messy, but things will be all right.
Pat, I'm going to go to you next because you're going to get the last word in your closing remarks. I'm going to ask you what's giving you hope, and then I'm going to give Loretta the
Let me
last
just
word.
echo what Dennis said. I was academic for a long time, university president for 8 years. Every year this time of year is awesome. This new generation of students come on campus. They're bright. They're energetic. They have hope. They see the kind of future for themselves. And as they go through their years, you see them turn from themselves to a broader commitment to a society and a community. That's what gives me hope, because that young group, that next generation, if we just help them, and that was inspiring to me this morning. There was a story of one young person who went to Arkansas, to a small town, joined a firm, and they committed to making a difference. You multiply that across the country. We have the right policy and the right things to let them do their thing. We're in good shape.
Loretta?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo this. If you go and talk to the interns that we hire every year at the Cleveland Fed, and we usually do a reception and have them, you know, talk about what they've worked on while their time at the Fed, is they are the most energetic, positive, excited about what they worked on, you know, can see linkages that we don't see, pro-education, really happy, you know, love math, which I'm a math person, so I love that. Like working with data, right? That gives you hope that, you know, the rest of us can stand out and get out of the way, and these guys are going to take over, and I use guys for generic men and women. They're going to take over and lead us in a better direction. So that gives me hope. And I still am hopeful that, you know, we haven't lost our way in terms of caring about evidence-based research, caring about what the data is telling us, caring what the true facts, you know, we care about that. I don't think we've gone over to the deep end yet on that. I do think that as a country, we do care about that. And I do think innately in our country, we do believe in equal opportunity and letting people have equal opportunity and doing our best to foster that kind of environment. We're not there yet, and I think we've seen a lot of problems come to the fore that people have been having to live with for a long time. But I'm hopeful that we still stand for those kind of ideals, and that gives me hope.
Loretta Mester, Dennis Lockhart, Pat Harker, thank you all so much for joining us at this very rare and special conversation. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Now we're going to hear.
All right.
Now we have some closing
Well, while you're applauding, let's thank Michelle for coming here and being part of this as well. Thank you. So let me start my remarks with the traditional thank yous. And first on that list has to be Teresa and her whole team. Teresa is an outstanding voice and mind on community development, and I am proud to have Teresa and her whole team here at the Philly Fed. Let's give them another round of applause. I'd also like to thank Susan Wachter, my colleague from the Wharton School, and the Institute for Urban Research at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks for your co-sponsorship. And last but not least, thanks to all the community development teams at the Federal Reserve banks that helped us organize this event. Of course, Philadelphia, but Atlanta, Boston, Cleveland, Minneapolis, New York, Richmond, and St. Louis. Thanks for all your help. And last, and absolutely not least, this doesn't happen without all of you coming. So thank all of you for being a part of this. And this gets better and better every year. Even though this is my first, this is a great tradition, and I want to thank you because you make this happen. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. So this conference, ROC, is our signature community development event, and I know many of you have been attending for years. Now, I had a chance, as I said, this is my first, and I had a chance to listen to some exceptional presenters and attendees, and I heard some great questions and some even better answers. I just want to take a few final minutes to talk about the past 3 days and share some thinking about the Philadelphia Fed's plans in this arena. Community development work is important, as you all know, for a number of reasons, not least of which being that what the Fed does and how we do it is a mystery to a lot of people. Despite what many people think, the Fed actually has a fairly limited set of tools. And as Dennis mentioned, the only policy we set is monetary policy. We don't deal with taxes or spending or debts or deficits, except to the extent that they affect the overall economy. But we do help banks to meet their Community Reinvestment Act requirements, and we have a singular role in brokering relationships between funders and organizations that can use the financial help. This sounds like an odd role for policy geeks, but it actually makes perfect sense. The goal of the Fed is to create conditions in which economic growth can thrive. One way to encourage that growth is by ensuring that every part of the country, every community, every individual has a chance to become economically self-sustaining. Now, some people might question why this should matter, especially if they're not directly affected by poverty. Or they may think that the time and money these organizations are expending could be better used somewhere else. So, should they care? And why should the Fed care? Now, aside from my personal view that we have a moral imperative to ensure that everyone has a fair chance at success, there is a practical argument as well. Regions are best off when all their constituent areas do well. Our own economic fates are informed by our neighbors. And the investments we make now to alleviate poverty, be they pre-K education or adult skills training, will come back to us all. That's why we call it an investment. We're helping to create the next workforce, the next engine of the American economy, the next wave of educators and engineers. Not to mention the people who will be contributing to the economy, and let's face it, our Social Security when we're all retired. Making sure that everyone has a level playing field just makes good economic sense. That's why I'm delighted to announce that the Philadelphia Fed will be leading an effort to bring national attention to poverty and the ways in which it influences economic growth and prosperity. We're calling it the Agenda on Poverty and Prosperity, an intensive research initiative to better understand how poverty affects the economy, to inform policymakers, and to use our findings to promote economic mobility. We will sponsor work on inclusive growth, tapping the nation's best economic minds and research, and pairing them with lessons gleaned from practitioners' on-the-ground experience. your experience. We'll conduct and share research, host online information and data tools for the public, and inform the Federal Reserve System's leadership about our findings. Additionally, we'll be encouraging investment in strategies that promote development and inclusion. Over the next 3 years, we will host a series of economic research in action labs. Top economic researchers will present their findings to leaders from the public, private, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors in our district to help inform policy solutions. Finally, we will continue to reach out to private sector partners for their thoughts and, of course, their resources, connecting them to practitioners that can put them to use. I want Philadelphia to be a leader in this work because I see it as a fundamental part of long-term economic health of this region and of the country. Economies evolve and approaches to growth and stability have to change with them. We can't wish for the resurgence of an economy long past. We have to adapt to new realities and use the lessons we've learned over time to usher in that new era, ideally one in which everyone can benefit. Each of you here today has played a part in gathering the information, relating the lessons, and making strides that have gotten us this far. And I'm grateful for your work and hope that we'll see some of you in this room presenting your research at one of our labs. For now, I want to thank everyone again for attending, for providing thoughtful and enlightened conversation, and of course, for the team that put this all together. Thanks.
That's really the team's idea.